Okay, so the last notes for Unit 5 are 5.17 Sustainable Forestry. And so let's talk about what forestry is and what makes forestry sustainable environmentally. So forestry is using any trees for lumber, and so it provides that ecosystem service to humans, and it minimizes for sustainable forestry actually minimizes the damage to the ecosystem when we remove those trees for lumber. So it reduces the habitat destruction, the soil erosion, and the other negative drawbacks of the forest for the timber lumber industry. So the first practice involves selective cutting or strip cutting, and this is only cutting some of the trees in an area. So usually that means the biggest and the oldest. We do this to preserve habitat, to maintain the biodiversity in the area, and we do this to preserve the topsoil. So we're not cutting down, clear cutting all of the trees. We're then, exposing that soil to the in the weather and things that might erode it, but just cutting down some of the trees and then preserving the integrity of the land. So you can see here, this is strip cutting where we've come through and just cut one area. You might see that in forested areas along roadways or something when you're traveling. This is clear cutting. You can see the stark difference there, and then this would be an example of selective cutting, as we can see in the picture. So we do this selective cutting or strip cutting using human or pack animal labor, so horses and things like that, to minimize the soil compaction from the machinery. And that's really beneficial to help the habitat as well. So you can see here using horses to drag out the trees. Then we replant the same species that's being logged, and this maximizes the long-term productivity of the land and preserves the forest for future generations. So all of that is important for the sustainability and the conservation of the trees in the area. Some other sustainable forestry practices include using recycled wood or simply like reusing the wood without recycling. So, for instance, you'll see these pallets being used in an outdoor furniture application, also as a barrier application here at around this patio. So, that's one way that we can upcycle, so to speak, wood instead of cutting down more trees or using more forest. Wood can also be chipped and used as mulch for gardens and agricultural fields so that's one way to reuse that wood. And then we can also reforest or replant trees in areas that have been deforested. And that's done all the time. So this would have been a clear cut area back in 2001. And then you can see after it was replanted, this is what it looks like 18 years later in 2019. And so you can also selectively remove diseased trees to prevent spread of infection through the entire forest. And this removes the host for the disease. It decreases the density, making the spread of the disease less likely. And so here's one example of that. Okay. Also, using sustainable forestry practices helps to suppress fires. So it stops natural fires from happening. And this fire suppression is the practice of putting out all natural forest fires as soon as they start. An issue with this is that it leads to more biomass buildup. So putting out the fire immediately leads to that dry biomass that would have burnt in the fire to actually build up, and it makes the fires worse in the future. So what should happen instead of just straight out fire suppression? Because just using fire suppression and not doing it in a well controlled way is not beneficial for the forest. So, what should happen instead is we should be monitoring the forest. So, close monitoring can help prevent fire damage and prevent worse fires in the future. We can actually do what is called prescribed burns in areas where we stop natural fires from happening. So, what this does is it actually causes, it doesn't allow for the dead biomass to build up. When dead biomass builds up, it's actually fuel that creates actually larger forest fires. There's actually stored nutrients trapped in the dead biomass, and these dead trees are actually susceptible to disease and they're susceptible to pests spreading throughout the entire forest. So, prescribed burns are when we conduct small, controlled fires that burn lots of dead biomass. It uses up the biomass or the fuel that's on the forest floor, preventing larger forest fires later. And this actually promotes nutrient recycling because when the fire comes through, the nutrients that are in the dead fuel actually get returned to the soil. This helps to promote new growth in the area, and because that dead biomass is all recycled back into the soil. So it's actually very beneficial for the soil to conduct those prescribed burns. So for this FRQ, for 5.17, you need to identify two characteristics of a forest that develop when fires are suppressed and explain how prescribed burns could address each of these characteristics. Okay, that's it for Unit 5's notes. Talk to you all in class.